Hello, everyone. We are going to go straight into the next presentation. As everyone give a massive applause for this next presentation. Oh, you can do better than that. A massive applause for this presentation. You're going to love this. Now let me see what this actually is. Circular ecosystems and threatening technologies. We have 4 people who are experienced in speaking, and we're not going to waste time giving bios. They're going to let them tell you who they are and what they want to talk about. And I'm going to be the timer, and I'll speak at the end. My name is Jeffrey Smith, and we're going to start in order with Isaac Nicholson.
Hello. Hopefully the presentation's queued up here. My name's Isaac Nicholson. I'm CEO of Circular Systems. We're a materials science company based here in California with offices around the world. And we're focused on really creating solutions to a lot of the massive problems that have been talked about today. My background is in fashion. Over the last 25 years, working within fashion supply chain and design, and as an entrepreneur starting brands and new manufacturing companies. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we're doing to help support a very massive shift that has to happen in the world, and a lot of really great ideas have been brought up already today, so we're going to just add to that. So we are a material science company fortunate to have won the Global Change Award, first prize in 2018, for our Agriloop technology. I'm going to show you just a quick 2-minute video that'll save a good amount of words, and we'll go from there.
Fashion is fun. But unfortunately, the fashion industry is devastating to our world, extracting massive amounts of natural resources and polluting with toxic and wasteful production systems. The industry is finally beginning to change, as big companies race to find solutions to eliminate waste and pollutants. At Circular Systems, we transform waste into resources, creating fiber, yarn, and fabric using 3 revolutionary technologies. The Agriloop uses leftover crop waste from food production to make high-quality biofiber. Agriloop biofiber makes trendy fashion textiles with award-winning regenerative technology that produces surplus clean energy and organic fertilizer for the local farms and communities. TexLoop is an advanced upcycling system designed to manage even the most complex textile waste with the lightest touch processing. The TexLoop preserves precious textile fibers for reuse in all kinds of new fashion products. And with Orbital hybrid yarn technology, organic and recycled fibers merge to create the highest performance new materials. Designed to last and help prevent the release of synthetic microfibers. With Circular Systems, what was once waste becomes valuable resources to uplift communities, heal farmland, and help regenerate the habitat that supports us all.
Thank you. So that was kind of a cute and simplistic rendering of what we do, but what it's all about is really this value system here. And we feel this is really where we should all as individuals be placing ourselves, but definitely where business should be coming from. And that's at the nexus of a fair, livable, and viable world. It just makes sense. So we can foster that with our business, and that's what we're doing. We sell fiber, yarn, and fabrics. And we've created some systems that actually allow us to support all 17 of the UN SDGs. And we have a mapping available to show you if you're interested in seeing that. So it's really about pushing the same shift that's already well underway in automotive and energy sectors in this area that I know so well, which is textiles and fashion. We have to go into a serious mode of resource efficiency. Otherwise, this industry is going to really add to our extinction potential So a massive space, you know, just the sector that we're working in fiber, yarn, and fabric is almost $1 trillion, and it's growing way too fast, like many things. And unfortunately, this massive industry is built on a totally faulty foundation. 90% of it is virgin polyester and GMO cotton. And unfortunately, that other 10% is mostly nylon and viscose. So it's all bad, everything we're wearing, pretty much. And it's all these factors, environmental and social impact, that are just off the charts. I don't really need to bore all of you with this, because this is why we're here. But, you know, the fact is we've got to change, and we've got to change fast. And so now we're seeing the biggest brands in the world stepping up and making massive claims. And this is driven a lot more by finance than it is actually by altruism or care for our habitat. But at least there's a driver. And what's happening right now is they're realizing that they're going to be out of resources pretty soon. And they're going to have to shift here, as well as young consumers walking away from companies that are destroying their world. So we're seeing some huge commitments being made, but how are these big companies ever going to pivot these massive ships that they're driving here to meet these big goals? So they need strong facilitation, and that's what we're here to help with. So there's some huge tailwinds, as I've just mentioned, and this fact that regulatory pressure and resource scarcity is going to prevent the fashion and textile industry from growing in near term is a big one, and that's finally made those CEOs and CFOs that used to be my worst enemies sit up and take notice. You know, so 20 years of banging our heads against the wall in this space, finally the financial wake-up call comes. It wasn't enough to save their children and grandchildren and all future generations of all species, but whatever. So the Boston Consulting Group mapped this and said the case for change is indisputable. I love that. So let's get on with it. Circular technologies are the change, and really striving for regenerative impacts. And so we're doing this with a really strict innovation criteria. What we're doing has to be massively scalable, or it won't move the needle. It's got to be cost effective, or it won't make it into market. And it's got to be higher quality and higher performing than this old school toxic virgin fiber crap. So we're not satisfied with recycled organic materials being substandard quality. That's been this terrible disinformation that's just been pushed throughout the industry and prevented the growth of these things for a long time. So we're doing this with two massive waste streams, the leftover biomass from food crops and textile waste coming off of production and off of consumers and out of warehouses where it's stacking up with the endless web returns now. So all of that flowing into a new proprietary yarn spinning system that harnesses shorter staple fibers from recycled textiles and prevents them from coming out in our laundry. And this is a huge factor we're going to tell you about. So let's take a quick look at what's going on in the industry. So right now we've got these things down in the lower left corner here that are literally killing our habitat, all of our conventional inputs. And then we have these new things in the market which are lower impact, which is a good start. And these things need to continue and be optimized, but doing less bad actually isn't good enough. We need to raise the bar on what we think of as sustainability in every industry. And we definitely need to move away from things like BCI. So this is a very massive and very fake claim being made by a group of massive retailers who got together with very likely Monsanto and put together this false flag greenwashing campaign that says conventional GMO cotton can somehow be better. And it's, don't buy it, please. But what we're doing is really looking at doing more good with our systems. So moving toward higher quality products that last a long time, are designed for recyclability, and ultimately regenerative systems designed with the Agriloop and materials that can go right back into cycle over and over again. So we're raising the bar, and we're looking for regenerative impacts, beneficial impacts as our goal. not reduced impact. So although that's a great approach for the transition, we need to reduce in every way we can, but we really need to be striving for a higher goal. So the text loop, I'm going to take you quickly through each of these technology platforms. Do a quick time check. I'm not sure how much we've got left here, but this is really going after this massive issue here, and that's that most garments are in landfill within a year after purchase right now. That's insane, because we're producing exponentially more garments than we ever have. So they're being worn for less time, we're producing more, and it's all stacking up. So we really need to enable this resource efficiency in all these different sectors here. We're doing it right now across multiple continents with recycling partners and then taking that resulting fiber into the big brands. So we're eliminating the requirement for fiber, for farming cotton fiber when we recycle it, and this is a big factor. And we're really going after the preservation of the embedded energy in the original materials. That means carrying forward the old dye stuffs, preserving that original fiber quality. We don't believe in melting down natural fibers into viscose in their first life cycle. It's just not a good idea. We need to use our fibers and keep that natural fiber around. Already selling to big brands, and in fact, there's a top secret Converse AllStar that's going to come out with our recycled cotton soon, and this is now on the market right now. So this is the beginnings of our products showing up. Really exciting. So I'm going to tell you about Orbital yarns, and this is a system that was created to get higher quality out of shorter staple fibers. So when we recycle textiles, the fibers that originally went into the yarns that make up those textiles get shortened drastically. So to spin new yarns, we have to carry that with a longer fiber, and typically we see a lot of quality issues and a lot of fiber falling out of yarns and fabrics, creating that pollution that's been talked about. So Orbital effectively bundles up those fibers and allows them to stay inside the yarns and fabrics. So we've recorded dramatically reduced shedding, which is the cause of microfiber pollution. So we are now getting that third-party validated. We'll have some really interesting data in the next week or two. And this is a big potential for the industry. We've been talking a lot about what are the impacts, how do we map them, where is this fiber coming from, what fabric is worse than the other, but there's zero solutions that have been brought forward in the industry until Orbital. So what we're doing is taking these various forms of sustainable fiber and rolling them into a new way of spinning where we're effectively wrapping up those fibers, and we're eliminating the pilling that's typically associated with recycled fibers. We're creating higher strength yarns. Normally there's issues with running speed using recycled yarns because they're weaker. We're getting incredible sports performance with no chemical finishing, and all of this thanks to the yarn construction itself. So it's a game changer in terms of quality. And now we're going to talk about what I think really will stir this crowd a bit, the Agriloop. So this has been called the golden chalice of sustainability by one of the world's leading materials scientists, Edwin Kay from HK Rita. He is the former CFO of Walmart, actually. But when he looked through this in a 6-hour technology review, which happened about 5 years ago, he said, wow, this is going to be massive, but it's going to take you 10 years to get it to market, and we're happy to say we're beating him by a few years. So that's good. Oh, thanks. So we're at the very end here. So what this is about is really addressing this massive opportunity, which is 1.5 kilos of leftover biomass for every kilo of food we harvest. What an opportunity. Right now we look at this stuff as waste and we treat it as such, so it's all massive climate impact and human health impact, up to 250,000 air pollution deaths a year. But just these feedstocks here, their biomass represents 5 times the global fiber demand all in. I mean, that's including everything, agri-textiles, industrial, non-wovens. So to even scratch the surface of these crops will make a massive impact. And here's why it's been called a circular or regenerative technology. So we're producing this beautiful biofiber, and it's essentially eliminating the burning and the rotting that creates all the CO2, the methane, the carbon monoxide, and just one more minute here. I'm at the very end. Okay, less than that. So we're eliminating that climate impact just by converting these biomass forms into products that can be worn rather than letting that carbon go up in the air. We're also sequestering that carbon back into the earth as we convert the waste of the waste into clean bioenergy that runs the facility, and actually we can produce surplus for local community. And on top of that, extracting the biochemistry that will get our industry off sodium hydroxide. So we're using these biochemicals taken from the plants to upgrade the fiber, and at the end we can return that solid waste when we recycle our water back to the fields as perfect organic soil amendments. So that's a really regenerative system. Thank you.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And that was Isaac. Now we're going to have Dafna Tachover speak for, and she will do the introductions of herself.
Hi, everyone. So now you're all going to see that I do have a cell phone, although I never use it, but it's usually in my car. But yesterday my car was broken into here. All my documents were taken, nothing else. So I cannot leave it in my car anymore. So I'll use it as a watch. So thank you for coming. My name is Dafna Tachover, and I'm the head of an organization called We Are the Evidence. And it's called We Are the Evidence because not only, okay, just a second. Not only we have more than ample scientific evidence that wireless technology is very harmful to humans, we have the human evidence, and unfortunately it is an epidemic scale. And I usually speak about the human evidence, but today I'm going to talk about the environmental evidence, meaning also the harm not just to humans but also to animals, plants, and the planet. And unfortunately, those are proven as well. And nothing has changed in the past 35 years in the way we live our life as much as our use and adoption of wireless technology. And we've become dependent on it, and we became addicted to it. And unfortunately, that addiction has made us not see what is just in front of our home, in front of our eyes, sorry. So, if you look at what happened also in the past 35 years, we have an exponential increase in health problems, dying animals, dying plants, and the evidence is here. As I said, the scientific evidence is pretty conclusive, not only in terms of humans, but also in terms of animals, plants, and the planet. And most recently, we have the NTP study. The NTP study is the federal government biggest study that was done on the adverse health effects of wireless technology. The NTP is the National Toxicology Program, which is the agency responsible to classify toxin. And on November 1st, 2018, this agency announced that their study found clear evidence that radiation from cell phones and other wireless devices are causing cancer and breaks your DNA. So while cigarettes cause cancer, this radiation causes cancer and breaks your DNA. While the scientists said that the public must be warned, the public not only was not warned, the FDA came out and said that this study does not apply to humans. So our government just spent $30 million, 19 years, studying what this radiation is doing to animals and humans, only to warn rats not to use cell phones. So this is, I mean, I'm sure as an activist, environmental activist, you know that our government are not very truthful, and logic is not a big part of their decision makings. And the real unfortunate thing is that that evidence that was found in this study found nothing new. We have thousands and thousands of studies showing the same thing, including many dozens of studies showing that this radiation breaks the DNA in animals and in humans. We also have a lot of reports by government agencies and military agencies. We have reports from the Navy going back to 1972 with thousands of studies showing the harms, showing numerous harms almost to every system and every organ in the human and animal's body. We have the Air Force report. We have a report from NASA. We have a lab of the EPA that was working between 1971 to 1986 with numerous studies showing clear evidence that this radiation caused profound harms to human body and animals. In September 2017, 240 scientists came out with what is known as the 5G appeal. Those scientists together authored over 2,000 studies showing the harms of wireless technology, meaning harm from cell phones, Wi-Fi, cell towers, and other wireless devices. And the reason they wrote the appeal is because they find that the evidence in terms of the harms of wireless is conclusive, and we cannot move forward and go ahead with 5G, because 5G is going to make those harms, which are already an epidemic, exponentially worse. And I want to read you what they write in their appeal. They said, the scientists wrote that the adverse health effects from wireless radiation are proven to be harmful to humans and the environment. Effects include increased cancer rates, cellular stress, increase in harmful free radical, genetic damage, structural functional changes of the reproductive system, learning and memory deficit, neurological disorders, and negative impacts on the general well-being in humans. Now they say, damage goes well beyond the human race, and there is growing evidence of harmful effects to both plants and the animal life. Now, this is a scientific evidence, but we see that evidence also in human, actually on the ground in terms of sickness. And the reason I started work on this topic is because I got sick from this radiation. In my background, I'm an attorney. I have an MBA. I was working for private equity funds in Manhattan. I also have a technology background. I used to be a telecommunication and computer officer in the Israeli Defense Forces, so wireless was my profession. I was early adopter, avid user of this technology. I loved it. And one day, no warning sign, it made me sick. And when something you used to love so much can destroy your life to such an extent to the way it destroyed mine, you want to understand how come you never heard anything about it. And that was really led me into that search of evidence on this issue. And after becoming sick, and I became sick with a condition called microwave sickness, in which people develop various neurological problems when they're exposed to this radiation, I took a Supreme Court case in Israel to ban Wi-Fi in schools and replace them with wired networks. And I had no doubt that we're going to find an epidemic of sickness in the schools from the use of Wi-Fi, and we actually had. We showed to the court over 206 children, and that was just in 6 schools that we checked, and we did not even check all the schools. And we could correlate the symptoms of each of these students to the Wi-Fi use and the cell phone use. Now, by the way, as a result of this case, Israel became the first country in the world to limit the use of Wi-Fi in the schools. Thanks. So the Siddha epidemic, and the evidence is very, very strong. We have the rates of autism grew 4 times in the past 10 years. What changed in the past 10 years? And again, there is a Harvard Professor University evidence paper showing the clear correlation of evidence. ADHD rates more than doubled in the past 10 years. Yale University professors show that yes, this radiation caused ADHD, and there are studies on over 82,000 women showing that women that were exposed to more radiation had higher rates of children with behavior and attention problems. We have evidence of reproductive harms. Male sperm is down 50% in the past 30 years, and between 15 to 25% in the past 10 years. And the evidence of correlation to effects of cell phones, especially in the pocket, is pretty clear. MS, Alzheimer, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the evidence is very clear. Now, when you think about it, it's not so difficult to understand why this radiation will affect humans and animals. We are electric beings. Our brain is electric. Our nervous system is electric. Our heart is electric, and the cells communicating electrically. This radiation from your cell phone, from your Wi-Fi, from Alexa is essentially electricity in levels which are quintillion times higher than what your body evolved to tolerate. And quintillion, it's 1 and 18 zeros after. Now, while we are sensitive to this radiation, animals can be even more sensitive than us to this radiation. For example, I'm a beekeeper, and bees communicate and navigate using electromagnetic fields, just like your cell phones. And when you add to this environment man-made frequencies that do not exist in the environment, again, in outrageous levels, there are going to be effects. And a lot of the problems that we now say that are because of climate change can much better be explained by the exposure of this radiation, especially when it comes to bees, birds, and other animals. So as I said, bees communicate using electromagnetic fields and also navigate. Bees have been dying, and the evidence correlated to this radiation is very, very strong. Evidence actually goes back to 1906, when Marconi, who started the radio station systems, put the biggest radio station in the Isle of Wight in the south of England, off the shores of the south of England. In 1904, he had the biggest radio station there. In 1904, 90% of the bees disappeared from this isle, and it's known as the Isle of Wight disease. And since then, the numerous studies show that this radiation affects the bees' ability to navigate, to communicate, to produce honey. They actually go foraging in the winter when the temperature is 0, and they're dying in the summer. And numerous studies that were trying to explain the colony collapse problem, they don't really find an explanation that makes sense. For example, they found that actually beehives that collapsed did not even have dangerous mites that usually you can find in beehives that die. So toxin, bad nutrition do not explain this colony collapse. Furthermore, they found that usually the hives that collapse are clustered together. The only thing that really can explain this consistently is the exposure of electromagnetic radiation. And those clusters do happen near sources of wireless radiation like cell towers. By the way, we're going to have a much longer lecture at 3:40 at the ping pong room, and then I'm going to present those studies and I'll elaborate further about the findings. What about birds? Evidence of the effects of this electromagnetic radiation on birds is going back to the 60s, when they show that microwave radiation affect the bird's ability to reproduce. They affect their ability to, they cause them weight loss, weakness, affect their wings, and bees that are sleeping near, nesting near cell towers cannot reproduce and die. For example, the one study showed that nests that were within 600 feet of a cell towers, 40% of the nest did not have offspring, in comparison to nests 900 feet and more that had only 3.3% of the nest without springs. So again, the evidence is very strong. And there's a document I recommend reading. It's called Birds, Bees, and Mankind, written by a German biologist, which elaborates a lot of this evidence and all the mechanism associated with the effects of this radiation on bees, birds, and humans. Now, when it comes to birds, actually there is an admission by the US government that the problem with migration is caused by exposure to cell towers. There's a letter from 2014, and they write the problem with migration is caused by the cell towers. And the FCC guidelines, which are supposedly supposed to protect us, are more than 30 years obsolete, which they are. There's a lot of evidence regarding other animals. And again, I'm going to discuss it a little bit later. There's also a lot of evidence that in regards to plants. For example, there is a meta-analysis paper that reviewed 45 studies on the effects of this radiation on plants, and they show clear effect, and they also show that some plants, for example tomatoes, mung beans, and peas, are much more sensitive to this radiation. And we have a lot of reports of trees dying all around the world, and they are dying mainly in urban areas and near wireless sources. So unfortunately, there is also effects on our energy consumption. The environmental movement has been adopting a lot of smart technology to combat various environmental effects. The new Green Deal also adopts the smart grid as a solution. But the thing is, actually wireless technology is one of the biggest sources of increase in energy consumption. For example, the increase in the wireless cloud between 2012 to 2015 is equivalent to adding 4.9 million cars to the roads. So adopting smart technology to combat the problem that this smart technology is causing, it's not very smart, rather dumb. And yeah. And the 5G effects, the 5G infrastructure that's supposed to connect 20 billion more devices wirelessly, add 800,000 more cell towers closer to your home, and 20,000 satellites that radiate our planet and everything within it, is going to increase that radiation or the energy consumption by at least 170%. And no smart technology can offset that increase. So I just do want to conclude. I want to say two things. First, there's a complete disconnect between what is technologically possible to what is biologically plausible. And our addiction to this technology made it easier for us to adopt this disconnect. And, you know, it's ignoring facts is only increase the size of the problem. And we have an epidemic-sized problem, and it's time to address it. We went too far with all these Gs of wireless technology. Going into 5G is a path we should not and cannot take. And I wanna quote the 5G appeal scientist. They said, "Inaction is a cost to society and is not an option anymore." And then they said that major primary prevention measures are adopted and prioritized to face this worldwide epidemic. And it's here and it's now, and we have to address it. Going smart is very dumb. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would now like to introduce Nils-Michael. That was Nils-Michael.
Wow, I don't know how to follow that. So, here we go. So I'm going to try to, that was remarkable, by the way. I'm a little scared, as I should be. So, I tend to be rather extemporaneous speaker, so I've actually created a script so that I stay on time. So with that being said, I'm going to try. So sometimes we can all feel alone, even in a room full of people. Like there's 100 so odd people here and today. But what if there was 1 billion people in this room? What would the power of that be? I want to introduce you to the emerging regenerative customer. So M&Ms originated in the United States in 1941 and have now been sold in over 100 countries since 2003. What's really interesting is that more than 400 million individual M&Ms are produced every day in the United States. With an average of 20 in a pack, that's 20 million a day, or over 7.3 billion packs. That's a lot of freaking M&Ms. Well, Mars is a $40 billion company because one customer buys 1 pack at a time. So imagine harnessing the power of 7 billion people a year through a simple piece of candy. And what if this is made from cocoa and sugar from a regenerative farm? So we went and found out if anyone cared. So we did a consumer study here in the United States with 1,500 people, and we did a separate study with about 1,200 organic shoppers. All the data in this reflects the general population. And we looked at attributes desired, struggles with current products, the role of purpose in purchase decisions, information gaps between purchase and purpose, the current understanding of sustainability and regenerative, current feelings about climate change, appeal of regenerative as a principle, not only just as an agricultural system, but as an entire business system, and a current understanding of a desire for regenerative agricultural practices. So who are these people? They're like you and me. They go to grocery stores, they go to natural food stores, they go to farmers markets, and you'll like this one. They go to clothing stores. They go to department stores. And they go to a lot of pet stores. So what did we learn? So we asked them about, have you heard the word sustainability? Have you heard the word regenerative? 10 out of 10 people had heard of the word sustainability. 7 out of 10 had heard about regenerative. But what they heard about regenerative was a lizard growing back its tail, a starfish being able to be smashed, and there's 90 starfish, a Prius braking system. But what they really talked about was forces of nature, understanding that things regenerate on their own, and that they in themselves were regenerating, even as they were taking the survey. It was inherent, it was understood, it was real. Then we asked them which they preferred, and 8 out of 10 preferred sustainability. Why? Because it was familiar to them, because they knew it, and they didn't know enough about regenerative other than lizards growing back their tail and starfish. Then we asked them about, have they been personally affected by climate change? And 3 out of 10 had. But what was fascinating, and we always ask questions and then ask them why. Well, if you prefer sustainability, why? And in this particular question, we said, explain why. And what was really fascinating, it was more than just themselves that were affected. It was their families, their friends, people who lived in Florida, people who were in Washington, people who were all over the globe. And one thing that came out more than anything was the sentiment that it's never been like this before. I've lived here 40 years and I've never seen winters like this. I've lived here all my life and I've never seen spring come so late or stay so long. Then we asked them, what can companies do to help you make better choices? Well, not surprisingly, make them cheaper and better. They also said, I'd love to see a regulated scale, which means they want a scoring system. They want to be able to understand what's the impact of this purchase on the earth, on the globe, on my own personal choice. They also said, be honest, for God's sake. And I say this because they don't blame the plastic straw manufacturer for the plastic straw that got shoved up that turtle's nose that we all saw being yanked out painfully. They blame themselves. But they also want to know from those plastic straw manufacturers, what can I do differently? How can I dispose of it differently? What can you differently to make something that I can live with, literally live with? And then they finally said, a lot. Care about nature. Yeah. So we thought, oh, well, the green sustainable products that are out there, they must be totally into that stuff. So we said, how satisfied are you with your current green sustainable offerings? Only 5 of 10. And the level of interest or level of satisfaction was tepid at best, because they knew that it wasn't clean or pure and that there was something about it that, just didn't seem realistic. So we said, oh, of course it's organic. Organic's, everyone trusts organic. Only 6 out of 10 trusted organic. So then we asked, what do you think about this? What do you think if business had a net positive effect? What do you think if business was interconnected and understood it was interconnected? What if it was motivated to do good? Now, what I think is doing good and what you think is doing good and you and everyone in here is different. There's a prosperity comes from the Latin root word prosperus, which is doing well. And that means differently for a lot of different people. So do good means what it means. And then accountable, which goes back to honesty. But the most important thing is that it's self-regulating by its members. So it's not the policy, it's not the regulations, it's you and me telling each other, oh, you shouldn't buy that stuff. It's having someone coming here and saying, this is a death machine, which I don't disagree with, by the way. So that's not a really moonshot, perspective on regenerative business. It's pretty plain and simple. Then we describe regenerative agriculture to them. No pretty pictures, no like moonshot sort of thing. We simply said it improves soil, animal welfare, social systems, etc. But more importantly, it can store carbon in the soil. So, assuming prices were the same, because if you've ever done market research, it's absurd to ask about pricing questions because nobody knows. It matters when you get to the store. I mean, think about you go out to dinner, you go, yeah, I'll have a piece of pie, $8 piece of pie, but God forbid you pay 80 more cents for, a glass of, a carton of milk because this other one's 80 cents cheaper. But the pie, sure, I'll throw it in. So you can't talk about price. So you always have to equivalate. 8 out of 10 wanted regenerative. So at the end of the survey, we said, which do you prefer now? Regenerative or sustainable? Anybody want to guess? Well, the answer is, given all you've read, 8 out of 10, 80%. So they started the survey saying, well, I prefer sustainable because I know it. They knew about regenerative because they seen a lizard grow its tail. And when we walked them through these fairly innocuous statements, they flipped. So there's this adage that people buy from people they trust. And I think that that's kind of BS. Unless you really know who you're talking to. I really do. I mean, I'm not trusting H&M. And I'm not trusting, I don't want to trash H&M. Anybody from H&M in the room, please? I just saw the slide, so that's the first thing I could think of. Maybe AT&T. So what the consumers said to us was, man, I really wish this regenerative thing happened 20 years ago, and I really hope it happens now. But tell me the goddamn truth and be honest and tell me what's really going on. And we will not blame you for making the plastic straw. We will co-create a better straw together because I'm complicit. And I need to understand you as the producer. I need to know you. So I want to present to you a producer who has trust. This is when it's supposed to play. Oops, it didn't play. Is it not linked? Because this is awesome. No? Oh well. I'll tell you who it was. It's Gabe Brown, who's a guy. Well, here you go. Crank it up.
We had a little over 2,100 visitors through the yard, and I want everybody that pulls onto our place to know that's our focus. You know, I get real tired of the word sustainability. Why in the world would I want to sustain a degraded resource? That ain't going to get me anywhere. I need to be regenerative so that future generations can have the opportunity to be sustainable.
Bada bing. Gotta love that, man. And sustainability, I hate to tell you all this, but it's dead. It's completely ineffectual. It hasn't worked. It's not working. Stop using the word. So let's go back to this M&M. Now, we may not agree with this little child's Flat Earth Society t-shirt, but we can still give her a hug, or him, I'm not quite sure, actually restore the Earth and its systems. So what we're doing is we're creating a global challenge to create a billion-person movement towards regenerative. Our summit will be next January here in San Francisco, because what if this small child had a M&M, which of course they would devour because they're delicious, but it was made from regenerative cocoa and sugar? Then we'd be somewhere. Thank you very much.
Your next speaker is me, Jeffrey Smith. All right, so I have a question for you. Imagine that at a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of global planetary destruction capabilities, and let's say global climate chaos was at 8 over the next few decades, where would you put genetic engineering on that scale? How many would say 7 or below? Raise your hand. How many people would put it at 8? How many people would put it at 9 or 10? Now, you guys are special. You guys are special. Most of you said it is higher than global chaos. Now I'm going to tell you some information to support that, either the same or high, at least an existential threat. Shall we go there? And at least an existential threat. Now, what happens when you introduce a genetically modified organism into the environment? We don't know. It goes away. It goes everywhere. It goes everywhere. There was a study told to me by Elaine Ingham, who was told to her by someone at the EPA, because they did it secretly. They altered bacteria and released it in one place and had monitor stations all around, I think a mile away, I forget. And yeah, they found the bacteria had been monitored a mile away from where it was released. But within a certain period of time, they found that genetically altered bacteria everywhere on the planet that they looked. Now, Elaine Ingham was told this because she was a graduate student at a time when a company that she was working with was going to release bacteria. Actually, here's how it works. They had bacteria to put on cellulose to convert it to alcohol or ethanol more easily. And then it creates a byproduct, which they said is great. Let's make it fertilizer and spread it around North America. So we'll have all these ethanol converted by our genetically engineered bacteria, and then we'll take the result of that and make it fertilizer. It's a brilliant system, right? And she said, well, maybe we should test it first. Yeah, you think? You think? The brain cells behind genetic engineering, incredible. So they tested it on wheat, and the wheat sprouted, and then it died because the fertilizer turned the roots into alcohol. Now, they were about to release this around the country as a fertilizer. And she says that it had the theoretical ability to render North American soil infertile. Infertile. And how do we clean it up? Good question. No one knows. Now, there was a bacteria that did get sprayed, a genetically engineered bacteria called Ice minus. It was sprayed on strawberries because this was going to protect the strawberries in California from dying from frost. So they spread it out on this field trial, and they were going to test it. But some very good people said, you know something, there's some weeds that also die from frost. And if this bacteria gets on the weeds, now we're going to have a weed problem. So they incinerated the field trial after they had released it. Now, the bacteria was called Pseudomonas syringae. Looks like a syringe. The point of the syringe causes condensation of the water vapor, which causes the frost. And so they made it blunt. And they made it a dominant trait so that it would end up not causing the condensation. Well, guess where else Pseudomonas syringae works? In the atmosphere above California. It's what causes the rain, a large part, to condensate and fall from the offshore wind. And if that got deployed in the 1980s or 90s, it could have changed the world weather patterns. Just one little bacterium strain introduced. Now we have a situation where there's bacteria. There is a bacterial remedy for soil that's had 10,000 field trials and is ready to be commercialized. The #1 result of genetic engineering, can you guess? Surprises. How brilliant are we? Genetic engineering is not rocket science. It's way more complicated. There are so many things that can go wrong and do go wrong. Now we have gene editing. Oh, guess what the biotech industry is saying about gene editing? It's precise and predictable and safe. Oh no, wait a minute. They said that 30 years ago. I'm just sorry. I just replayed the record. And so did they. Precise, predictable, and safe. In fact, we shouldn't call it GMOs. We saw what happened to them with concerned consumers. Let's call it breeding. And let's let the companies that introduce it not even tell the governments that it's genetically engineered through gene editing. And they can just introduce it. In fact, they can take a gene-edited crop, and then they can edit it again and again and again and again and again. And by the time it's done, it may look completely different than what was the products of the billions of years of evolution, but we'll just call it breeding. Now, there's 5 or 6 major papers, peer-reviewed and published in the last 2 years, that show, guess what? Just like the soybeans from 25 years ago, gene editing causes massive collateral damage. Can cause mutations, deletions, additions, any one of which can turn a harmless crop into a deadly one, or change the nature of the bacteria. And bacteria, how do they communicate? What happens with them? They share genes between each other. So the bacteria that was released in the strawberry field, if it went out, it could have ended up populating and creating a survival advantage because it will survive for frost. And so it could have had a dominant placement throughout the microbiome of the soil. But gene editing is cheap. You can get the components for less than the price of dinner. To produce an organism and release it takes more money, but we now have thousands of labs that are cooking up their gene-edited crops and gene-edited bacteria and algae and fungus and fish and insects and trees and flowers ready to introduce. And if you take it all together, what do you get? Chaos. A corrupted gene pool with no technology to replace it. A corrupted gene pool. A replacement of nature. A replacement of nature. Now, this is hardly known. And our organization, the Institute for Responsible Technology, is working with other organizations to build a coalition and to get the information not just to the anti-GMO folks, because there's a small number of us, but the people who are involved in planetary survival, the climate chaos people, the oceans people, the soil people. And not to say, oh, good luck. No, to say, yes, we're going to take this existential threat and adopt it as part of our messaging too. So we'd like to invite you, no matter what organization you're working with, to receive our 2-minute videos, our 3-minute videos, our information, and to share it. Because this information, as I say, is hardly known, and yet it is the #1 agenda of the biotech industry to get their gene-edited products ignored. What did President Trump do on June 11th? Some of you know, signed an executive order which eliminates almost all oversight in the United States on GMOs, especially on gene-edited organisms, and ask the Secretary of State, the U.S. Trade Representative, the USDA head, the FDA head, the EPA head, to all work together to create a plan to convince the rest of the world to accept U.S. gene-edited crops and other products, and to dismantle, quote, undue trade barriers, which means safety studies, which means requirements for letting consumers even know that they're eating or buying or clothing themselves with gene-edited products. And so this, if passed, if we let this go forward, then all future generations, even if we solve the climate chaos, save the oceans, protect the soils, we still may lose the natural world we cherish. So I'm going to ask you to participate, and I'm going to give you a number to text, and then you can sign up for our newsletter, and we will get you information. We will get you information that will help you spread the word so that others also realize the existential threat. And so if you'd like to text this number, I don't have it on the board, I'm sorry. It's 415-985-0884. I'll say it one more time, and then if you don't catch it, you can catch me afterwards. And I'm also speaking with Dana Pearl at 340 across the street for an hour and a half. 415-985-0884. Text the word JOIN, J-O-I-N, and it'll ask you your name, and then it'll ask your email address, and then you'll be receiving information from us, which is critical for the survival of the planet. How's that for a sales pitch? You know, you want to save the world? Give us your email. But really, you see, actually, most people would not put genetic engineering above climate change. And a lot of people think it might be just, it's just like traditional breeding, because billions of dollars have been spent to disinform. Now, I can talk about other problems, and we're going to talk about this at 340. In addition to the self-propagating genetic pollution, there's also little micro-factories, SynBio, creating things like proteins that make vegetarian burgers look like blood. The Impossible Burger. Friends don't let friends eat the Impossible Burger. Period. Not only genetically modified soy sprayed with Roundup, but proteins that have never been part of the human food supply before, including 46 proteins that happen to be part of the chaos after the fermented, genetically engineered yeast. And do you remember the Ltryptophan disaster in the 1980s? They genetically engineered bacteria to produce Ltryptophan more economically. And the process of genetic engineering, what's the number one most common result of genetic engineering? Surprise side effects. In this case, it created very, very small contaminants, tiny amounts of contaminants that were deadly. Killed about 100 Americans, caused 5,000 to 10,000 to fall sick. And it's the same type of micro factory that's being used for the Impossible Burger. So there's a lot of information that show that GMOs are dangerous, unpredictable, and persist. And now we have the governments of the United States, of Brazil, of Argentina, of Japan, of Chile, and others saying, bring on the gene-edited crops. Europe has said, no, we're going to treat them just like GMOs, and the number one agenda of the biotech industry is to pressure and overturn that, and they have brought in the Trump administration to use as maximum political, economic, and diplomatic pressure to eliminate those barriers. Now, I have been involved in genetic engineering education for 23 years. And our Institute for Responsible Technology and our books and our movies and whatnot have educated people about the health dangers so that people choose healthier non-GMO choices. Now it's important to be organic as well, because Roundup is sprayed on organic products too. And for the first time in 23 years, I'm taking the reframe that we started 23 years ago, and I'm changing it completely. Because it's not all about food choices. We need to change public policy, because it's not food choices that's going to drive out the algae or the bacteria or the fungus or the insects. Now we need a different rhetoric, and now we need a coalition that encompasses the world to incorporate the messaging that actually saves the planet so that our grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, that's my time. Should I finish my sentence? So that our grandchildren and our great-great-grandchildren are not inheriting a Monsanto future, are not wishing that they knew what the products of the billions of years of evolution looked like, tasted like, felt like. We need to protect nature now. Thank you. Thank you all for being part of the Doomsday panel. Yeah, Miguel said, we want the technologies that can really knock things apart, and we're going to put you all together. So everyone take a breath, and release it. Okay. This is the place where activism starts. This is not a chance to feel like a victim. It's time to feel like a victor. And I want to thank Soil Not Oil for giving all of us a chance to use this as a platform. Thank you.
He's going to be a tough competition for the 340 lectures, but we have a 340 lecture at the ping pong room about 5G threats, so hope to see you there.
Yeah, we're going to arm wrestle over which is the worst threat.
And it's the same across the room.